Assia Djebar's Fantasia, an Algerian cavalcade, originally published in French as L'amour, La Fantasia in 1985, is a genre-defying work of post-colonial literature that blends autobiography, historical narrative, fiction, and feminist reflection. As one of the foremost voices in Maghrebian literature, Djebar uses this powerful text to reconstruct Algerian history from a female perspective, focusing particularly on the colonial conquest of Algeria by the French and the often silenced experiences of Algerian women. The book unfolds in multiple interwoven strands: personal memoir, historical documents and testimonies, and imagined voices of Algerian women. Its structure mirrors the fragmented identities of post-colonial subjects, especially women caught between language, culture, and colonial memory. Through poetic prose and shifting perspectives, Djebar explores themes of language, violence, memory, voice, and gender, making Fantasia a foundational text in post-colonial and feminist literary studies. 1. Fractured structure, multiple voices. The narrative in Fantasia is nonlinear and structured into four main movements, each reflecting a different mode of storytelling. Personal fragments. Djebar recounts her own life experiences growing up as an Algerian girl in a colonized society, her education in French schools, and her complex relationship with the French language. Historical episodes. She revisits the French conquest of Algeria, particularly the 1830 invasion of Algiers and subsequent violent repression, using colonial military accounts and letters. Female testimonies. Djebar gives voice to anonymous Algerian women, mothers, daughters, widows, who witnessed the violence of war, or endured suffering in silence. Fantasias. These are musical military parades that become metaphors for both colonial spectacle and nationalist resistance. The structure reflects the fragmented nature of colonized identity. By weaving together these disparate threads, Djebar resists the linear, male-centered, Eurocentric historiography and reconstructs a polyphonic, feminine narrative of Algeria. 2. Language and colonization. One of the central themes is the ambivalence of language, especially the French language. Djebar, like many Algerian writers of her generation, was educated in French and expresses herself primarily in the colonizer's tongue. She reflects on the irony of finding her literary voice through the very language that silenced her people. To write in French is to cry out in the language of the enemy. Yet, French also becomes a tool of liberation. For Djebar, French enables her to tell the stories of Algerian women and document their suffering. This paradox, language as both weapon and bridge, recurs throughout the book. Her own coming-of-age story centers on learning to read and write, moments she equates with both empowerment and alienation. French allows her to enter the intellectual world but distances her from her Arabic-speaking mother and the oral traditions of Algerian women. 3. The Algerian War and women's silence. Much of Fantasia grapples with the violence inflicted on Algerians during the colonial and independence wars, and especially the invisible traumas endured by women. Djebar resists the glorified nationalist narratives that focus solely on male heroes. Instead, she examines what war means for women who are raped, widowed, silenced, or made to suffer behind closed doors. She reconstructs women's wartime experiences not through linear storytelling but through fragments, testimonies, and allusions. This form mirrors the silencing of women's voices and the broken transmission of memory in post-colonial societies. For instance, in one section she recounts the story of women detained in French camps who used body language and coded signs to communicate resistance. Their words are never directly quoted. Instead, Djebar translates silence, showing that not all speech is verbal. These veiled stories highlight the intersection of gender, culture, and colonization. Women in Algeria, she suggests, are doubly colonized by the French and by patriarchal structures in their own society. 4. Rewriting colonial history. Djebar uses the first French invasion of Algiers in 1830 as a symbolic and literal entry point into the story of colonization. She reads and rewrites official French military documents, letters, and journals, exposing the violence behind the civilizing mission. She offers harrowing descriptions of mass killings, destruction of villages, and desecration of bodies. These are not fictionalized. They are quoted or paraphrased from actual colonial sources. But Djebar's act of curation, who she quotes, how she juxtaposes sources, gives these documents new meaning. Through this, Djebar performs a counter-historical act. She interrogates the archives not to deny history, but to challenge its singularity and insert the suppressed stories of the colonized, particularly women. The Fantasia of the title, a term referring to staged equestrian performances in North African culture, becomes a metaphor for both colonial spectacle and resistance theater. In Djebar's hands, the Fantasia becomes a feminized narrative performance, reconfiguring history as a cultural procession that can be choreographed anew. 5. Female bodies and national allegory. A powerful motif throughout the novel is the female body as a site of colonial and cultural conflict. Women's bodies become metaphors for the invaded territory of Algeria itself, raped, silenced, veiled, wounded. Djebar revisits the trope of the veiled woman, both literally and symbolically. In colonial discourse, the veil was interpreted as a sign of backwardness. Unveiling was promoted as a symbol of liberation. Djebar complicates this binary by showing that veiling can be both oppressive and protective, a form of resistance and concealment. She writes of women who removed their veils to fight in the revolution, and others who maintain them as shields against intrusion. Her goal is not to romanticize or condemn the veil, but to reclaim it as a complex symbol of agency, culture, and identity. 6. Autobiography as political act. Djebar's personal narrative is not merely self-reflection but a political statement. Her account of attending French schools, learning to write, and entering academia is placed against the backdrop of a nation struggling for self-definition. Her alienation from her mother, who is illiterate, Arabic-speaking, and bound to traditional roles, highlights the generational and linguistic divides wrought by colonization. Yet, Djebar does not present herself as superior. Rather, she is haunted by her mother's silence and seeks to use her French literacy to recover and honor the voices of women like her. The act of writing is both confession and reparation, an attempt to bridge the gulf between personal freedom and collective history. 7. Intersections of history, myth, and memory. Djebar's storytelling blends historical realism with mythic and poetic elements. Her prose shifts from descriptive to lyrical, from academic to elegiac. This stylistic diversity reinforces her message. There is no single way to narrate the colonized experience. She invokes metaphors of wounds, echoes, and palimpsests to describe memory. History, for Djebar, is not linear but layered, one story hiding beneath another, always incomplete. Her own memories are filtered through her education in the French literary tradition. She cites writers like Flaubert and Lamartine, not to praise them, but to interrogate their complicity in colonial ideology. In rewriting history from the point of view of the colonized woman, she deconstructs both Western canon and nationalistic narratives. Key themes. 1. Language and identity. Language is both a tool of domination and emancipation. Djebar's fraught relationship with the French language mirrors her fractured identity. She writes, "French is the language that colonized me, yet it is the only language I can write in." Language becomes the central paradox of the book, necessary for communication, but marked by violence and erasure. Djebar uses French against itself, filling its syntax with Algerian memory, pain, and resistance. 2. Gendered experience of colonialism. While men are often the subjects of nationalist histories, Djebar centers women's roles in colonial and revolutionary struggles. She challenges the silence imposed on women by both French colonizers and Algerian patriarchy. By giving voice to anonymous women, those raped, imprisoned, or excluded, she insists that national liberation must include gender liberation. 3. Fragmentation and wholeness. The structure of Fantasia, disjointed, multi-voiced, nonlinear, is not merely stylistic. It reflects the psychic fragmentation of post-colonial identity. Algerian history is told in fragments because it was lived in fragments, through rupture, displacement, and trauma. Djebar's goal is not to piece together a neat narrative but to honor fragmentation as a truthful mode of storytelling. 4. The role of the intellectual. As a French-educated Algerian woman, Djebar occupies a complex position. She is both insider and outsider, translator and traitor. She questions what it means to be an intellectual and a writer in a post-colonial context. Her burden is to use her privilege to amplify silenced voices, without speaking over them. Style and form. Djebar's style is lyrical, poetic, and fragmentary. She frequently shifts tense, point of view, and tone. Her writing resists easy categorization. It is part novel, part memoir, part historiography. This genre hybridity is intentional. It mirrors the hybrid identities of post-colonial subjects. The book's experimental form challenges the reader to confront the limits of conventional historical narratives and invites us to listen differently, to read between the lines of official history and hear the voices in the margins. Conclusion. Assia Djebar's Fantasia, an Algerian cavalcade, is a powerful reclamation of history, language, and identity. By centering female voices and embracing a fragmented, poetic narrative, Djebar critiques both colonial violence and patriarchal oppression. Her book offers a radical rethinking of how history is told, whose voices matter, and how memory can be both a burden and a path to liberation. Djebar's genius lies not only in what she says, but in how she says it, through silences, ruptures, echoes, and songs. Fantasia is not a straightforward story but a chorus of Algerian voices, many of them women, singing a history that refuses to be forgotten. In resisting the constraints of colonial language and historical narrative, Djebar creates a new literary space, one that is feminine, fractured, and free. Fantasia remains a landmark text in post-colonial literature, a haunting meditation on voice, history, and the cost of remembering.